When I say we had company at any given time, you could look out, actually on the surface, you could look out and you see a big fin out there swimming around and around and around, seemingly out of fairness to the sharks. They weren't going to attack us, but you can imagine, the fright that we were experiencing just to think that, look at the sharks. And if you couldn't see a fin out there, if you look down in the water, put your head in the water, you can see them swimming down under you. And then every little bit, even that first day, there were those who maybe had been injured and maybe they have a temperature, they begin to hallucinate, and they imagine they see an island out there and they swim out to that island, and then you hear a blood-curdling scream and you see that Kpop jacket go under, and then momentarily Kpop, then it brings the remains of the body back up to the surface. Like a fish cork, the cork comes back up. Back in 1943, I had registered, of course, for the draft, and I knew that my number would be coming up soon. And I tell my dad I want to get in the Marine Corps, so I went to the draft board and asked if they would call me early so that I would not be drafted and them put me wherever they wanted to put me. So I volunteered, actually, for the Marine Corps in 1943. I went to San Diego to boot camp. And after boot camp then, they, for some reason or other, they selected me to be seagoing, to go aboard a large combatant ship. And so I went to sea school, and then after sea school, then they sent me up to San Francisco. And I was handed over to the USS Indianapolis to be part of the Marine detachment aboard the Indianapolis. And I stayed there the rest of my time in service. Well, when I saw the Indianapolis for the first time, I thought, man, what a ship. And it was big, 610 feet, 8 3/4 inches long, and normally there would be 1,200 men aboard. And that was a sight to behold, I thought. Everything was completely new to this country boy. And I guess it was just a routine thing for the ship to provide the training that all of us needed. And so I was trained. But again, we were right in the middle of the war. And when I went aboard the next few days, then we're in combat. Because I went to Saipan, Tinian, Guam, Sea Battle of the Philippine Seas, down at Peleliu. I was at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, 3 airstrikes on Tokyo. And lastly, I was a Marine guard that guarded Fat Man and Little Boy, the components of the 2 atomic bombs that we delivered to our B-29 base. So when we came back to the States and got repaired, then all of a sudden we get word that we're going to go back to the forward area, and we look out on the dock, and we saw all kinds of brass in that Marines Navy, and a lot of Marine guards and so on, and then we saw that big crate there. I try to tell how big that was, and it's like my fish story. It gets bigger each time, but seemingly it was, 12, 15 feet long, 4 feet high, nearly 4 feet wide. And I know it was a sailor, Ed Brown, just passed away 2 weeks ago. Anyway, he was the crane operator, and he reaches over and he gets that. And as he got it up, just ready to bring it over what we call the quarterdeck, he's a monkey anyhow. And what did he do? He pulled a stupid thing, but to him it was fun. He kind of released the cord that's pulling that up, holding that, and let it just drop a little bit, as if he was losing control. And of course, we had the foggiest idea of what we had in that crate. But then he set that on the quarterdeck, and then once he got it on the quarterdeck, then I don't know exactly. I don't know that I even saw how they moved that into the port hangar, but they moved it into the hangar, and then my captain then came to me. I happened to be the corporal of the guard at that particular time, and he said, "Harrell, I want you to station a guard in the port hangar deck." And Captain Parks, what do we have? He said, "We don't know." Well, we like to be inquisitive a little bit. And so he said, "We have the least idea." In fact, he says the skipper of the ship, Captain McVeigh, doesn't know what we have. But he said that we are told that every hour that we delay getting it to the forward area will cost lives. And then So they put that in the hangar deck, and I stationed the guard to guard that big crate. And the big crate, if you could visualize, it's put together with screws, so to speak, and they had countersunk the screws. In other words, they buried them in, and then they put a wax over the top of that screw head so that no one tampers with that, or they could tell if they did. And then there were two proposed to be Air Force officers that came aboard kind of with that, and they had that little canister in a metal crate with a padlock on it, and that was half of the uranium that America owned at that time. And those two individuals were not Air Force officers. They were scientists from Los Alamos, and they were going along, and they would follow that all the way through to our B-29 base, and they would be the ones that would hook that up once it would be going aboard the B-29s. We delivered that to Tinian Island, which is our B-29 base. We picked it up on the 16th of July, 1945, and we made 5,400 miles to Tinian Island with that cargo. We made that in 10 days, which is 540 miles a day in a heavy cruiser. And then we unloaded our cargo, and then we back up then to Guam, which is what we call CENTPAC, Central Pacific Command there. And Captain McVeigh then asked for an escort, and they refused him an escort. Now, we received orders to go to the Philippines to prepare for the main invasion of Japan, and again, Captain McVeigh asked for an escort. They refused him an escort. Now, here we have a heavy cruiser with no underwater sound gear. So they are sending us out in harm's way, no way to protect ourselves from enemy submarines. And, of course, Commander Hoshimoto was waiting out at the crossroads, and he fired a spread of 6 torpedoes, hit us with 2, and the ship went down in about 12 minutes. There were 1,197 of us aboard, and we surmised that maybe 900 of us got into the water, which meant about 300 didn't even get off the ship. That particular night, I was sleeping topside in that, here we are in 100-degree weather out there and no air conditioning on a heavy cruiser. And so since we were traveling, so to speak, the hatches all open and refused us an escort, then it meant that, the enemy isn't out there. Therefore, Captain McVeigh had given us permission to come topside and sleep. And so I got off a watch at 12 o'clock, and I went below deck, and I got my Kpop life I got my blanket. I didn't get my Kpop life jacket. And I came topside, and I went all the way forward under the barrels of number 1 turret, which was within, I would say, 40 feet or so of where the bow of the ship, that first torpedo cut about 45 feet of the bow off. When I say cut it off, if you could just imagine that here the whole bow of the ship is cut off, and so the front end of that ship is just a complete open funnel, and the ship moving forward, then all the water is coming in, and it's all the bulkheads down below are open, all the hatches are open, so water is just gushing in down below. So anyone in the first 100 yards of the ship, which is about half of the ship, they don't stand a chance, especially if they're down any place below the water line. And so then I began to make my way then to my emergency station, which is back midship. But on the way back then, knowing that the ship was doomed, because I could hear the bulkheads breaking below, and I knew that it's, not possible that the ship can recover even before I could get away from the forward area. If you could just visualize the first 100 yards, or all the bow of the ship is under. It's already under the water. And then so much is coming through from that second explosion there on the starboard side, back close to the marine compartment, that we're taking on so much water there that now the water over there is on the starboard side, so the ship is listing to the starboard, and the first 100 yards, so to speak, of it is underwater. And as I make my way then to my emergency station back midship, there were those who were coming out of the forward area, and as they were coming out, you could see that they were in their night clothing. Most of that was officers' quarters. And as they came out on the main deck, they were pleading for someone to give them some assistance. They'd been flash burned because not only the explosions of the torpedoes, maybe as much as explosions below deck and so on. In fact, the explosion from the magazine under number 2 turret, all of the magazine there blew up and went through the top of the turret. And so as they came out on the deck pleading for assistance, I'm making my way back to the quarterdeck, which is my emergency station. And as I was making my way back, I realized I don't have a life jacket, and I knew that the ship was doomed. And so when I get to the quarterdeck, my Marine lieutenant was there, and I see big canvas bags of Kpop life jackets hanging all around, and asked Lieutenant Stauffer permission to cut some of those down. And he said, not until we get word to abandon ship. Well, the ship is sinking. In fact, within a minute of that, the ship, if you could visualize, the first 100 yards or half of the ship is under, and it's listing to the starboard so much that the quarterdeck normally would be 8 feet above waterline, but now we're listing so much that water is on the quarterdeck, and so we're having trouble even to stand on the deck. And then after a period of time, then so much water is coming in now that it begins to erect itself, not completely, but it erects itself some, and then the nose is going under, and then finally word then trickles down then to, there was a Navy commander that came from below deck, and as he came through the hatch, I recognized who he was, but he was nearly beyond recognition. Flesh burned, flesh hanging from him, from his face and his arms. And some sailor said, "Get the commander a life jacket." And so someone began to cut those down, and I managed to reach in to get me a life jacket. But a life jacket is a big roll of Kpop. I call it a horse collar. And so I grabbed that, and I put it on like a vest, but I didn't fasten it in the straddle because I knew that momentarily I'm going to be leaving the ship, or the ship is going to leave me. And then word finally trickles down then that the skipper, Captain McVeigh, had given orders to abandon ship. Now all communication was knocked out, all power was knocked out. No lights other than the inferno basically below deck, and some of that coming through the hatches so that you could see intermittently light coming through from the inferno burning down below. And then I managed to get over to what I call the rail, big steel cable across the quarterdeck. And then when word came, then boys rushed over to the high side and climbed over the rail, jumped over the rail, jumped on each other, and to look down in the blackness of the night, looking down at all that oil on the water and realizing that, this is the end of life maybe. And then finally then to step over the rail and make a couple of big long jumps, and jumped into the water feet first. And my Kpop jacket, I didn't fasten it in the straddle, so when I jumped in the water feet first, that Kpop jacket came up over my head, and then I knew I had to get my head above that oil. I got my head above the oil then to swim away from the ship, then to see the bow under, the fantail coming high in the air, those 4 big screws still turning. From down below, I'm looking up, and there's some light up there, and I can see boys as they jump. They can't see those screws down below because they're looking at the blackness of the night. They're looking down at the oil and so on, and they are jumping in, some actually jumping into those screws. And then I watched the ship then as it nosed down and kind of turned to the starboard and, goes under. And then I'm away from the ship maybe 50, 75 yards or so, and we take an inventory of the little group that I'm in, and best we could kind of count off, there was 80 of us. And then we struggled, through the night. Several did not have Kpop life jackets. Some were injured, and they didn't make it till morning. There were 3 of we Marines. One didn't make it till daybreak. And the other Marine, a boy that I refer to as Spooner, Miles Spooner, he'd gone into the water head first, and all that oil in his eyes. Now the next day or two, he's going to try to rub that oil out. But as he rubs that out, the salt water now is turning to powder, and he's rubbing that powder on his eyeballs. So he's going to get to where he can basically, he can't even blink his eyes. His eyes are just big red sores, and he was in misery the first couple of days. We were probably in, I don't know whether it was 10-foot or 12-foot swells, but if you've got 80 people and we're all trying to hold together, and then we go up on a swell and that swell breaks away, then we're scattered. Some's on one side of the swell, so to speak. And so all of a sudden, we're scattered. And so we try to hold ourselves together, and finally someone, I don't know who or what, but anyway, we begin to form a circle those of us that were able-bodied would take our Kpop jacket and hook onto our buddy. And so we formed a circle. Now we're all in the circle, so to speak. And then when we come up on the swell and the swell breaks away, we pretty much all drift accordingly. And we lost several boys, though, even that first night before daybreak. And then when daybreak came, then in fact, one Marine buddy of mine, he didn't make it through the night. But then the first day, the next morning, we had company. When I say we had company, at any given time, you could look out. Actually, on the surface, you could look out and you see a big fin out there swimming around and around and around, seemingly out of fairness to the sharks. They weren't going to attack us, but you can imagine, the fright that we were experiencing just to think that, look at the sharks. And if you couldn't see a fin out there, if you look down in the water, put your head in the water, you can see them swimming down under you. And then every little bit, even that first day, there were those who maybe had been injured and maybe they have a temperature, they begin to hallucinate. And they imagine they see an island out there and they swim out to that island. Or just like one came up to me and he said, "Hey, Marine, see that island over there? I just came from over there. Lieutenant Parks or Captain Parks, Lieutenant Stauffer, they're over there. They want you to come over there having a picnic." Well, I know better, but it's nearly convincing, And then to see him swim away from me, maybe 25, 30 yards or so, and then there he's splashing in the water, and then you hear a blood-curdling scream, and you see that Kpop jacket go under. And then momentarily, Kpop, then it brings the remains of the body back up to the surface, like a fish cork. The cork comes back up, and then if you check that body, then immediately you aren't going to check it because the sharks see all of that blood, they smell that blood, and they come, and the body is mutilated maybe. But even so, maybe the bottom torso is gone or the body is disemboweled. And so that's taken place so many times, even the first day, but more so even the second day. But on the second day, just visualize that here we are, we're swimming nearly constantly, and our Kpop jackets are not holding us up like they were when they were new. And we're desperate for water, and then to have a little rain cloud to come over, and, you look and you see, and you just thank you, Lord, it's raining. You open your mouth heavenward, and, you can, even with a big mouth like mine, you can catch, can catch some water, but I took my greasy hand, and kind of funneled some of the water to get and that isn't, just a few minutes till the little shower is gone, but at least we got a little bit of water there the second day. But even by the third day at noon there was only 17 of us left. So, the sharks didn't get everyone, but some of them were injured early on before they left the ship. The sharks hit many of them, and we heard those blood-curdling screams over and over and over. And then boys hallucinate, hypothermia, and they dropped by the wayside, so to speak. We made a mistake in that someone passed away, and someone would say, "Hey, let's get his dog tags." Okay, who's going to keep the dog tags? Okay, I'll keep the dog tags, someone will say. And so you pass all the dog tags to that individual, but then after a period of time, where is that individual? He's gone, and all the tags went with him. And so there's no way to identify the body then later when the search crew comes along and looks at those bodies. So as I was just stating that there the third day at noon when there's only 17 of us, and even that third day at noon, our Kpop life jackets, there was supposedly a little tag on it saying good for 48 hours, but the 48 hours already passed. So by the third day at noon, here we have a Kpop jacket on, but it's not holding our heads out of the water. And so we're having to just swim, nearly constantly. And then finally we thought, well, hey, we'll take this thing off and we'll turn it upside down. We are sitting in it. So by seating in it, it has still enough buoyancy that it's holding our head out of the water a little better, but we're having to swim to keep ourselves erect, or else it'll kind of pitch you in the water, and then you're struggling to get back in that Kpop jacket. And so we're having a terrible time with that. And so it was sometime then that third day, we came upon a swell, and we could look off at the starboard at a little ways, and we saw what appeared to be just a raft out there. And we yelled out at whomever out there, and they responded to us. And so here they began to come into our group. And when they came into our group, we noticed that there's a raft, but no one's on the raft. And so they're armed up on that little makeshift of a raft, and they came in, and it consisted of two 40-millimeter ammunition cans, and seemingly it might have been something like an old potato crate, slatted potato crate or orange crate, and they had those lashed together. But what was on the raft was Kpop life jackets. They had taken Kpop life jackets off of boards that had already expired, and they'd squeezed those out the best that they could. You know, you can take a sponge, and it's full of water. It won't hold any more water, but you can take it and squeeze it out, and it's going to hold more water. And so that's what they'd done with those Kpop jackets. They'd taken them off of boards that already expired, put them up on that little raft, and the sun shining 100 degrees. And so they had exchanged those, and they came into our group, and they said that they were swimming to the Philippines. And they asked if anyone wanted to join them. And I said to my Marine buddy, I said, Spooner, I'm going to go with them. And he said, Harold, if you go, I'm going. So here 2 Marines joined 5 sailors, and we think, we're going to swim to the Philippines. Well, we didn't know it was another 500 mile. But here our group has gone from 80, third day at noon now, only 17 of us. So anyway, we joined them, and we start toward the Philippines. And we made some headway, but then we began to see that later in the afternoon that it was overcast, and we could see, hey, we aren't going to see the sun go down, and therefore we aren't going to be able to see the moon at night or the Southern Cross. So how do we know which way is west? And sure enough, later then that afternoon, it began to get seemingly it was going to get dark through the night. But sometime later that afternoon there of the third day, we came up on a swell, and we could look off at the starboard, maybe a couple of 100 yards or so up and out from us away, and we could see every now and then an old crate would come up. And I called attention to my buddies. I said, there's just an old crate looks like out there. And there was kind of a compelling influence, say, go and see what that might be. And so I told them, I said, I'm going to swim out and get it. And first they said, well, the shark might get you too. You better off to stay here. And I said, well, we haven't seen any sharks in the last couple of hours or so. I'm going to swim out and get it. So here I'm dog paddling, and I make my way out to that crate. And as I got closer and closer, may I say, there are times when you pray, and there's times when you really pray. And I'm praying for water, I'm praying for food, I'm praying for something. And as I got within 6 or 8 feet of that old potato crate, I could see those potatoes in that, floating in the water. And in desperation, I reached for that first potato. And as I got a hold of that first potato, kind of in the agony of defeat, that rot began to squeeze through my fingers, and I thought, oh, my rotten potatoes. And often in my talks, I asked the ladies, I said, you know what a rotten potato smells like? I know what they taste like. And to take that potato and to peel it somewhat with my hands, you don't spit out all of the rot, and you peel it somewhat with your mouth, but you're so desperate for water that even the rot, it has some water in it other than the salt water. And then I began to think like the ant, I may be out here another day, so I peeled off several of those potatoes. I filled my dungaree pockets full of those, and then I began to swim back then to my buddies. And as they saw me nibbling on something with my arm upon that potato crate, several potatoes still in the crate, they holler out, what is it? Rotten potatoes. And they leave the raft, and they came out and joined me, and we had a little bit of a picnic. I often say that all we had to eat was half-rotten potatoes, but no ants to bother us. So anyway, we had a little picnic there, and then it's still so dark that night that later in the night that no way to know which way to go, and so we're just basically hanging on to the raft. And then sometime later that night, we hear voices again, and we responded to them, and they back to us. And after a period of time, just by voice, by sound, here, Lieutenant McKissick, Charles McKissick from Texas. He and I think 5 or 6 sailors maybe were with him. And here they began to come into our group. And after a period of time, then maybe one, and then a minute later another one, and, by voice, and they came in. And then there was a certain Marine that had a pocket full of half-rotten potatoes that he shared those with McKissick. And then we began to talk about what we needed to do. And he said, well, we've got to get close enough to the Philippines so that someone will spot us and maybe rescue will come. And we tell him that's what we are going to do. And he said, yeah, but you're not going to push that raft. And we said, yes, we are, because we got spare tires. And so we shared some of the half-rotten potatoes with them. And then sometime then later that night, I don't know what happened, really, because my mind is playing tricks on me even by now. I'm completely exhausted. I've been awake, so to speak, no sleep for 4 days now. And the next morning, on the fourth day morning, I'm with McKissick and one sailor. I'm not with the raft, and now our Kpop jackets are gone. We've been, through the night. They did fairly well, but by morning now they're completely waterlogged, and we're seated in our Kpop jackets. And I look over at this one sailor, and looks like his head is dropped into the water. It looks like he's given up. I go over and shake him, and he's just barely awake. And he responds. But maybe the second or third time I checked him, then his head already dropped into the water. So it's just McKissick and myself. And I knew McKissick aboard ship. He was just a peach of a guy, Navy lieutenant. A lot of times when I would have the watch, and for the orderly, for the captain, McKissick would give me an order to take to the captain. And the greenhorn that I was, I didn't know the nomenclature of all the things that they were speaking about something out at a certain distance, traveling a certain, way, and so on, and how fast he was going, to repeat all that to take it to the captain. But with McKissick, he would have me to repeat that back to him. And, maybe the first time or two, I didn't have it right, but he would see to it that I had it right. So he was just like like an uncle, or like a real friend. And he'd see to it that I had it right before I went and told Captain something that was not really right. And so here I'm with him here that fourth day. And he would say to me, hey, Marine, you ever been to the Philippines? No, I've never been there. Well, he promised that once we got to the Philippines that he would take me under wing and so on, and take care of me. But my mind was playing tricks on me in that even though I knew who he was, and had the greatest respect for him, but to me, he was Uncle Edwin. I had an uncle that was like 2 years older than me. We grew up together, and I called him Uncle Edwin. I can remember many, many times calling him Uncle Edwin. To me, that's who he was. So you know kind of where I'm coming from. And anyway, after a period of time there, getting close to the evening here of the fourth day, then we see planes flying over 30,000 feet or so, but no one's looking for us. And all of a sudden, we hear a plane, and I holler out McKissick, I hear a plane, I hear a plane. And he likewise said, yeah, I see a plane. Look, there he is. And here's a plane, looks like it's just going to fly directly over us, but he's flying about 8,000 feet. Well, we had renewed vigor, and we are splashing water. We're yelling. We're doing everything imaginable to attract his attention. But if he knew we were down there and we had, so to speak, deer hunter orange on, no way that he could see us. Actually, he's flying about 8,000 feet. He's looking forward to him about 4 miles. He's looking out in his peripheral vision on each side about 2.5 miles each. So he's looking at 20 square mile to see a man's head down here 6 by 8 inches. But I like to say that in the providence of God, he saw us, because here's what was happening. We see him, and he comes in on a dive. He starts with a dive, and we see, we just thank you, Lord. He sees us. Rescue's coming, at last. And here he's coming in. But let me back you up just a bit. Lieutenant Gwynn flying there about 8,000 feet. He's had trouble with his radio antenna. The little trailer behind that aircraft, and the aircraft, a little Ventura, I call it a B-25. It's a land-based plane. He can't land in the water. But here he's going to fly directly over us. and we are waving. We're so excited. He has gone aft, and he's turned the controls over to the co-pilot, and he said he's going to go aft, and he opens the bomb bay door momentarily, and he's going to reel in that antenna. He's going to put a stabilizer on it, and so as he opened the bomb bay door, he glances down momentarily, just kind of glances down like 8,000 feet, and sees the water down below, and he sees an oil slick. As he sees the oil slick, in his mind, there's a submarine down there. And so what does he do? He rushes back to take over controls of the plane, and the crew know that he has seen something. They yell out to him, "What is it? What is it?" Of course, all the sound of the motors, and he says, "Look down there." Well, they look down there. What do they see? An oil slick. But Lieutenant Gwynn then has them to load the bombs, because in his mind that oil slick represents an enemy submarine down there. So he's loaded his bombs. He comes in on a bombing run. We're waving. We're so excited. He sees us, but he hasn't seen us. Now, as he starts in on his bombing run, all of a sudden he's down close enough that he sees down in the water, he can see massive sharks. He sees sharks attacking boys. And as he comes down, he sees a boy just being completely mutilated, by the sharks. And so he comes down, then doesn't drop a bomb, but he comes down and circles us then a time or two. And I can see him today as he goes around McKissick and myself 2 or 3 times. And, he tilt those wings and basically saying, "I see you, don't know who you are, but I see you, and I'll be calling for help." And then after a moment or two, then I see him, he goes up, and he's still circling, but he goes up over us. And I thought, well, what's he going up there for? Well, actually, he was having trouble with his antenna, and he goes up higher to where his antenna then would help him to reach out then with his plane, with his radio. And then he radios back at Palau to announce that ducks on the pond. Now, he didn't know whose ducks we were. But anyway, there's boys out there. And then as he radios back then to Palau, there was a Navy lieutenant by the name of Adrian Marks, and Marks then was a pilot of a PBY, and he was to go out on a search and destroy for submarines. And basically, he had his instructions, and here he's getting nearly to his plane. The plane had already been warmed up, ready for he and his crew to get in, and he gets that word, that there's boys out there and there's sharks, etc. And so he gets in the plane, and he knows where he's to go, and he's rushing out the fastest way that he can. He gets out to where we are, and likewise, now he sees that we're scattered over a 75-mile area, and he sees sharks attacking boys. He said he saw maybe 30 boys and more than 30 sharks attacking the boys. So he calls back at Palau, and he asks permission to do a landing. And they tell him, no way do you open sea landing in a PBY. Now the waves, we like to think that they were maybe 10 or 12 foot swells, so you don't land the plane like that. But he and his crew says, we've got to land. Look, there's sharks down there, just all kinds of sharks, mutilating the bodies. And so he asks permission again. He tells them that the sharks are eating the boys, and they tell him no, but he just hangs up the phone. And he and the crew says, we've got to land. So he takes that big goose and he brings it down, and he hits that first swell. It went up the air 50 feet or so, and then he bounced it several times before he finally got it landed. He tore up one of the motors, ruptured the pontoon a little bit, but he finally set that big goose down, and then he begins to run the swells and picking up stragglers, and he picked up McKissick, and then later he picks up me. Now, there's no way that he could take the props and go against the swell. He had to run back and forth to where he could turn and go. And so then after a period of time, though, he picked up, several boys, and then he picked me up, and I get aboard the plane. They take me like a sack of feed, drag me in. The plane is still moving, and they reach out and get me. I think the guy that threw me in the plane was, 6 foot or 9 foot something. Anyway, I think of him as being a giant the way that he picked me up and put me in, but he wasn't that kind of a man at all. But anyway, he put me in the plane, and now they take me like a sack of feed, and they stack me here. The next guy stack him against him, and they picked up 56 boys. Well, the plane won't hold 56 boys, but he tied 7 out on the wings. Now, he knew that the plane couldn't take off ever. And so any way that he could put a body or two, and then when I got aboard the plane, then after a little bit, I look across the plane and I see USMC, I see Spooner, I see those sore eyes. And he's reaching down on the deck of the aircraft. He has a can of green beans, and he's finding a little stud bolt or something down there, and he's hacking away, and finally he knocks a hole in that can of green beans. He turns it up, and he's drinking some of the bean juice, and I see that, and I asked Spooner for some of his bean juice. Well, you'd have to know Spooner, but he kind of told me where I could get off, and I said, Spooner, you don't know who this is. This is Harrell. Well, I was his squad leader, and frankly, he had been shanghaied out of 3 different outfits before he came aboard the Indianapolis. And Captain Parks had told me when he came aboard, he said, Harold said, your squad is one man short, and you inherit Spooner, and here's the history. And you do not allow him to bring reproach to the Marine Corps aboard the ship. I don't care what you have to do to him, and he meant it. He said, if you have to throw him overboard, but don't let him bring reproach on the Marine Corps. So anyway, here's Spooner. And when I tell him who I am, well, he kind of falls over the buddy between us and shares some of the bean juice with me. Well, the rest of the story basically is being rescued that night with a destroyer coming in to pick us up, the USS Doyle. And I ended up then going down to Palau to makeshift. That was the closest hospital for maybe I was there a day and a half. Then I catch a hospital ship in the USS Tranquility. They bring me to a little better hospital in Guam. I'm in the hospital in Guam for, I think I was there in there 3-4 weeks or so. Then I go to a CB camp to kind of recoup. And then after a period of time, then finally we catch an aircraft carrier and we come back to the States. We got back to the States on October the 2nd. I'd been overseas a good period of time, so I have a 30-day leave coming, rehabilitation leave because of some injuries that I had, and so on. So I had a 90-day leave. So I thought, man, I'll be home for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, for New Year's, etc. And so I was prepared to leave for home on the 4th of October. But on the 3rd of October, I ended up in Balboa Hospital. I had a perforated appendix. I went kind of into sick bay. They checked me in emergency. They rushed me to Balboa Hospital. And I get there, then they take my blood count, and they basically say, we can't operate now. All of that poison had leaked out in my system. And it was 29 days later, 11,800,000 units of penicillin later before they could operate. And they operated, and it was successful. And I didn't get out of the hospital until January the 16th. Then I had sufficient points to get out. The war was over by now, and I think you asked me earlier, when did I find out, what we were carrying? Well, I found that out on the 6th of August when they dropped the first atomic bomb. So finally, I got out of the Marine Corps on February the 17th, 1946. So that's basically my story.